High over the Arctic, a satellite swings along a long, looping orbit. For 10 seconds, it screams on the exact frequency your GPS depends on. From Spain to Svalbard, the map blinks out. If you've watched the news and wondered why pilots over Europe keep losing GPS for no reason, this is the answer they spent years chasing. Planes, ships, whole navigation grids, blind for a few seconds. Then, nothing. No warning, no claim. Everyone blamed solar weather. They were wrong. Two researchers in Texas tracked the signal to within 5 meters, and it landed on a single Russian satellite, one built to watch for missile launches. And the tell? Whatever it jams, it never touches one system, Russia's own. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how they caught it and why Europe was never the real target. Strap in. The chessboard just moved. Before we get to the satellite, you need 3 things on the map. First, where this hits. Not one country. The blackouts stretch from Spain to Svalbard, across Greenland, into Canada. That's not a jammer on a hill. That's something looking down on a whole hemisphere. Second, why it matters. GPS isn't just the blue dot in your car. It's the timing signal under aviation, shipping, power grids, and every precision weapon the West fields. Knock it out, and a lot of very expensive hardware suddenly goes deaf. Third, who's been here before? Europe has been shouting about Russian GPS jamming for years. A plane carrying the EU's own president lost its signal on approach. RAF jets near Kaliningrad went dark mid-flight. Every time, the same answer from Moscow, denial. But all of that was ground-based. Trucks and towers near the border. Annoying, local, deniable. I've sat through enough planning sessions to know the rule. If you can deny a capability, you keep testing it. And this one wasn't coming from a truck. It was coming from orbit. But the story really starts with what each side is actually saying about it. So who put what on the wire? 3 readings, and they don't agree. Start with the researchers. Their finding, in plain terms, a single Russian early warning satellite, fingerprinted to 5 meters, pulsing on the GPS band 75 times since 2019. Humphreys, the lead, didn't call it an accident. His read, that this looks like the periodic test of a capability that would do real damage if it were ever turned on in anger. Now Moscow. On every jamming accusation so far, the answer's been the same. Their spokeswoman called the claims preposterous and 100% false, the West's web of lies. On this specific satellite? Silence. No denial, no explanation. The embassy just didn't answer the phone. And then there's the careful middle. Some analysts aren't sold that it's deliberate at all. It could be stray emission from a radar doing its day job. Here's the gap this whole video lives in. Everyone agrees which satellite. Nobody agrees what Moscow meant by it. And notice what's missing. The Pentagon won't confirm. NATO won't confirm. The one thing that would settle it stays classified. But claims don't decide this. The hardware does. Let's go look at the bird. Now look at what's actually up there. The bird is called Cosmos 2546. Launched in 2020, it's part of a 6-satellite Russian constellation called EKS, and its day job has nothing to do with GPS. It's a missile warning satellite, built to spot the heat plume of a ballistic launch the second it leaves the pad. So why can it blank a whole continent? Look at the orbit. It doesn't circle the equator. It rides a long, steep ellipse, climbing high over the northern hemisphere and just hanging there for hours. When I see an orbit profile like that, the first thing I check is dwell time. And the dwell on this one is brutal. One satellite can loiter over Europe long enough to do real work. Here's the physics that matters. The GPS signal reaching your phone is unbelievably faint, a whisper from 12,000 miles up. Now put a loud transmitter on the same frequency, broadcasting down from orbit. The whisper drowns. You don't have to break GPS, you just have to shout over it. And the tell is in the details. The pulse sits just off the exact GPS center frequency, narrow band, short bursts. That's not a malfunction. That's somebody dialing in a weapon without showing the whole hand. And whatever it jams, it never touches GLONASS. Russia keeps its own eyes open while everyone else goes blind. A missile warning bird, quietly moonlighting as a continental blinding tool. But a jammer that flickers for 10 seconds isn't the threat. The threat is what happens when somebody stops practicing. And that's the part nobody's ready for. Here's what wasn't in the press release. Everything you just saw was on low power, practice rounds. Remember the tell. The signal sits just off the GPS frequency. The lead researcher said it straight. If a real conflict starts, you slide that transmitter onto the exact band, crank the power, and the few-second flicker becomes a permanent wall. He called it a massive escalation in a quiet electronic war, moving from blanks to live ammunition. Now stack that on what the US Space Command already warned about. They said out loud that Russia has fielded weapons that can go after satellites directly. So picture two layers. One bird jamming the signal from above, another threatening to kill the GPS satellites outright. And here's why a few dark seconds should scare you more than it sounds. Modern Western warfare runs on the clock GPS provides. Precision missiles, drone navigation, secure comms timing, even the synchronization under power grids and banks. Jamming doesn't decide this fight, timing does. Take away the timing, and a lot of smart weapons get very dumb very fast. This is bigger than a Russia problem too. The Russian people don't run this constellation. A small military leadership class does, and they're the ones choosing when to flip the switch. So the real question isn't whether one satellite can blink Europe, it's what happens the day they stop testing. And once you see that, the stakes change shape. Look at the chessboard. Now look at the chessboard. This isn't really about your phone, it's about leverage. Start with the money. A single missile warning satellite, already in orbit, doing a second job for free. Against it sits a Western navigation system that took decades and tens of billions to build. That's the asymmetry Moscow loves. Cheap pressure against expensive infrastructure. Add it to the tab on a war they're running on a credit line with no lender. Then the allies. Europe isn't blind to this anymore. That's the whole point of the research going public. The pressure now is to harden GPS receivers, lean on Galileo, and build backup timing that doesn't depend on a signal from space. But that costs money and years, and not every capital moves at the same speed. Berlin and Warsaw feel a Russian jammer very differently than Madrid does. Now the read on Moscow's own house. We war game signal denial more times than I can count, and the blue team never liked the answer. Because a tool like this isn't loud. It's a message you can send and deny in the same breath. That's exactly why a small leadership class likes it. Deniability is the weapon. So where does it go? 3 paths. Most likely, the quiet tests continue, and the West slowly armors up. Worse, a real crisis, the transmitter slides on band, and a whole theater loses its clock. Off-ramp. Exposure raises the cost, and Moscow files the trick away for a darker day. Moscow has decisions to make here, and not all of them get made by the same people. My read, and this is one analyst's call after 30 years of watching plays like this. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't really aimed at Europe. It was a rehearsal, run in plain sight, to see who'd notice and what they'd do about it. The answer for years was nobody. That just changed. Anvil math. When the cost curve crosses the capability curve, the doctrine has to bend or break. A satellite already in orbit doing a second job for free against a navigation grid that cost decades to build. That curve just crossed. The West has to bend its assumptions about GPS, or it breaks in the first hour of a real fight. Watch what the West does with backup timing. If alternative navigation suddenly gets funded and fast-tracked, you'll know the classified briefings said what the open research only hinted at. What's your read? Is a jammer you can deny more dangerous than a missile you can't? Because nobody knows when to call it an act of war. Drop it in the comments. The question of the day is pinned, and I'm reading the first 50 in real time. The sharpest take shape next week's analysis. If this gave you a clearer read on the play, hit that like button. It tells YouTube to push it to the next person who needs it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. Ring the bell, the math doesn't stand still. I'm Anvil, signing off from Theater Zero.